Me too. Me too, honey. Peace, family. How y'all doing? We're here with chapter 10 of the Roll from Orion. And we're going to go through the pages so you can screenshot and read along. And my wife was talking about amazing deadlifts today. And how did they make you feel, honey? Wrong. But she mean, oh, strong. Okay. Right. That's more like it. Just let me know if you couldn't see anything, and I'll just make it available so you can get a better view of it. So, and yes, please don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and share. Please help your big brother out. Thank you. Make sure you guys get a good picture of this, a good look at this picture here. Interplanetary magnetic field lines of the sun. So, the more civilized, the more unconscious and complicated a man is, the less he is able to follow his instincts. His complicated living conditions and the influence of his environment are so strong that they are drowned. What the hell? The quiet voice of nature, called Jung. ORION, 1951. The last dying words of Kurtz left me apprehensive and restless, for I sensed that Lucia was preparing us for an encounter with death. She was obsessed with the classics about love and hate, beauty and the beast, Coleridge's Poe, Goya, Conrad, including the musicians Paganini and Rachmaninoff, and Kiss were all haunted by their attempts to unmask or imitate death. So I was anxious about the next white powder trip, even though John was not. Lucia must have realized my fear because she began to explain some Egyptian idea to us about death as dust settled over the mountain horizon. The pharaohs believed that what is above is the same as what is below. In other words, the earth, sun, planets, and stars mirror microscopic organisms in the tiny quantum world, she said. For example, imagine that the sun represents a virus infecting the earth, which is like a one-cell organism. I had trouble with this comparison, but John's imagination captured the idea immediately. I suppose if I were a million miles up in outer space, the sun and its magnetic field would look like a viral infection engulfing the earth in its immobile-like magnetic field. He said, trying to understand where Lucille was going to with this idea, rather. She explained that what made her realize that the architecture of the earth and the sky was a mirror of the microscopic world were certain identical processes. For instance, the process of magnetic reconnection in the earth's plasma barrier, the magnetosphere, was very similar to DNA recombination in the cell. Lucia explained magnetic reconnection first. As the magnetic fields of the sun and earth bump into each other, field lines stretch, snap, and reconnect, causing sun particles to slide like beads onto Earth's magnetic field lines. In time, these sun particles arrive at the poles of our planets and generate the aurorae, she said. According to Lucia, the cellular counterpart to this snapping and reconnection of sun lines with Earth's is DNA recombination. In her research tablet, she showed us a drawing of the two processes, and we had to admit that they were remarkably similar. She said that the ancient Egyptians called the process crossing over, just as our modern scientists do. Now, I understood the similar process of cutting and splicing DNA together. First, an endonuclease performs a single strand nick into each DNA strand. Strand exchange or invasion is the crossing over activity. Rec-A protein then helps the strand base pair so the nicks can be sealed by DNA ligase. If a branch migration at the crossover point or X line occurs, more of each strand becomes part of the opposite molecule. What Lucille was saying is that this same microscopic activity happens in the Earth's magnetosphere when the magnetic field lines of the Earth and Sun reconnect. Put simply, large-scale events in our planetary world are mirrored by tiny quantum processes. So this means that even though we perceive our world as large, it may actually be microscopic, a tiny grain or sand, as the poet William Blake suggested. On a large scale, Lucia explained the strand exchange taking place was the merging of the sun's magnetic field lines with the earth. The ions on the magnetic field lines of the sun were one type of life form and the ions of the earth were another. One might say that the sun was injecting its life into the earth's magnetosphere. According to scientists, this is an energy transfer, but Lucia said it was an exchange of elements on the molecular level. She expanded on the idea by saying that the movements of the Earth's magnetosphere due to the solar wind were very similar to the activities of binary fission in bacteria. Tiny bacterium has one chromosome, which is attached to the plasma membrane and not in a nucleus. The chromosome divides into two, producing two daughter chromosomes, which each chromosome attaching to a different part of the membrane. The cell then pinches between the two areas until the cell wall splits, producing two daughter cells. Lucia explained that this process is similar to what happens to the Earth's magnetosphere during a substorm, a powerful solar eruption, sometimes impacting with the strength of a massive earthquake. Feeling uneasy, I stood quietly gazing at the darkening sky as trivia ripped through my mind. According to NASA, these storms happen every 27 days and are related to the sun's rotation or can be caused by the coronal mass ejections. These interplanetary ejections have massive, slowly rotating magnetic fields with a plasma of cold ions. Interrupting my spasm of thought, Lucia said, doing what scientists call a southward interplanetary magnetic field, the outermost sunward loops of the Earth's magnetic fields are broken and swept into a magnetotail, which stretches like a teardrop on the dark side of our planet for 200 to 220 Earth radii, or 800,000 miles into our outer space. Still, the trivia stuck at my mind, informing me that one Earth radius equals 6,378 kilometers, or 3,906 miles. And then the information stopped, and a strange nothingness smothered my thinking, giving me some peace. Her statistics showed her scientific exactitude, a comforting thought. Lucia flipped through the pages in her notebook to another drawing that showed the Earth's long magnetic tail pinching in two. Due to the magnetic pressure in the magnetotail lobes, the plasma sheet is pinched until a neutral point forms, she said. Reconnection occurs within the neutral point, snapping magnetic field lines back towards Earth and forcing a bubble of plasma out of the magnetotail on the other side. We had to admit that a cell pinching together until the cell was split to produce two cells was identical to the Earth's huge plasma sheet pinching to a neutral point to produce a large bubble of plasma. Put simply, the Earth's magnetosphere acted like a minute one-cell organism replicating. Our planet also has poles similar to the poles of a cell. On and on she went until we both could see there were some amazing similarities between what is above in the sky and what is below in the cellular world. Stunned that the pharaohs understood the dynamics of both space physics and molecular chemistry, we had a new appreciation for Lucia's research. But there was more. The Egyptian kings and nobility, said Lucia, understood that afterlife existed at the quantum level. In some ways, death resulted in a person being composed of indestructible atoms or composed. I'll read that again. This seems possible because we are composed of indestructible atoms of carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, and hydrogen that are released at death for recycling, she reasoned. Many of these elements become trapped in the Earth's magnetosphere, or magnetic field lines. Intrigued, John said, trapped like in the Van Allen belts? Lucia, yes, Lucia said. Trapped in the hot thermal hell of molecules that bounce back and forth forever unless they happen to escape in time through the lost cones. The perfect hell, I thought. The Van Allen belts, the ring current of trapped ions and electrons around our planet. Lucia continued. The pharaohs mapped a path for the dead to follow using the pole stars, points on Earth, and the magnetic sphere as guidelines. We thought about this for a moment, trying to relate to the idea that after death, the Earth was like a one-cell organism. Then John said, so the path they map relative to the Earth and stars is really the path through a one-cell organism. Lucia nodded in agreement, her eyes locked on John's. A path through a primordial E. coli bacterium, she repeated. Shit, I thought it all comes back to shit. I knew that E. coli was a one-cell bacterium commonly found in our intestines, a bacterium that ate shit. I also could understand that if the Earth and its magnetosphere were an E. coli, knowing the path through it would be valuable information. But this idea of primordial E. coli confused me, and to be honest with you, the idea essentially stunk. But I felt it was only fair to hear out. The kings believed that at death one returned to the origin of time. At this origin, the deceased was at the beginning of creation, the moment in time when the first cell was recreated. The deceased could then choose to become an adaptive mutation, a being beyond human, by following the Egyptian path through the Duat, she said. Slowly, awareness diminished my confusion. I was beginning to understand her, and then my precognition caused me to think of string theory, the idea that our universe is made up of tiny vibrating one-dimensional strings or bands. The theory postulates that we are not point particles, we are rubber band beings. All forces in matter arise from these little isolating strings. The theory also claims that there are 10 or 11 dimensions, and some of these are curled up. If a curled up dimension happens to be a time dimension, a trip on it would mean going back in time, perhaps to the origin of time. I knew that a dying person experiences a past life review, so it seemed possible that it was similar to traveling back in time on a curled up dimension. I imagine myself being hurtled to the origin of time by the snap of a rubber band. Lucia's idea was remarkably similar to Nietzsche's Overman, the being beyond human that the man on the tightrope could not reach for his transformation because of the jester's tricks. The duat, of course, was the Egyptian hell, a mysterious place that many thought was near the constellation Orion. Others thought that it was an irregular funnel in the earth similar to the one in Dante's masterpiece, The Inferno, where the poets Dante and Virgil journey into the fiery furnace to witness the vengeance of God's justice on sinners. According to Lucia, the duat was the Earth's magnetosphere, and on the small scale, it was the E. coli cell. Suddenly horrified, I realized that Lucia planned to send us to hell, where John and I would travel the abyss together like Dante and Virgil. It was a bold idea that the goal could make possible. Wanting to vomit, I swallowed hard to stop my reaction. Then I sat there like a mummy, frozen in my mental hell, quietly waiting to see if that is what she had in mind. I tried to reason that poets like Theodore Rokoff and other madmen went there all the time, for if death were a trip to the tiny quantum world, so was madness. Tell me more about the path, Lucia said, John, lighting his cigarette. How does a dead person get to it? I listened closely to the conversation, trying to imagine a path through an E. coli bacterium. Lucia explained, the deceased is dead but alive, which is reasonable because of the second law of thermodynamics, the idea that energy cannot be created or destroyed. But the living dead also travel in the afterlife. You mean I could fly wherever I wanted to go? Say to Ireland, said John, sticking his cigarette in his mouth so he could thrust his elbows up and down like a wounded albatross struggling to rise. Lucia knew he was making fun of her. She paused just long enough to make him feel foolish, and then she threw a hard ball at him. Carl Jung did it, she said sharply. This statement brought John back to earth and stunned him, as if he had been struck by the pitch. We both listened as Lucia told us about the great psychologist's near-death experience. Jung actually wrote his experience down in his autobiography, she said. He was in a Swiss hospital after a heart attack in 1944. Suddenly, he found himself about 1,000 miles above the blue ocean and green continents of the earth. His amazing description of the earth from the height matched descriptions 20 years later by astronauts. He could see Ceylon, India, and the Arabian desert, the snow-covered Himalayas, the part of the Mediterranean Sea, along with the clouds and fog. She continued calmly without any interruption while airborne. Jung had sudden inclination to turn around. After thinking about turning around, he actually did. He had been standing with his back to the Indian Ocean and his face to the north when he had this inclination to turn around and go south, she emphasized. Turning, he saw a huge dark block of stone about the size of a house just floating in space like him. As he approached the rock, he had the strange feeling of all his earthly thoughts, wishes, and desires being painfully stripped away from him. What remained was his history, his essence, what he was, essentially. He then saw the primal form of his doctor float towards him, beckoning him back to earth. She paused. My point is that he thought about turning around in space, and he did it. Lucia was suggesting that it was possible, as the Egyptians believed, for one to navigate through space, through the Earth's magnetic field, while out of the body and dead. She believed that the deceased would retain consciousness after death, albeit at a deeper level similar to that described by Carl Jung. John was intrigued, but I was speechless. What exactly was she getting at? It's the path I want to know about, said John abruptly, crushing his cigarette into the ashtray. Would an Egyptian have gone south like Carl? No, said Lucia, and just as quickly she stood up, picked up her notebook, and retreated into her glass laboratory without telling us the path. I had the irresistible urge to throw one of her garden rocks through the window of her glass sanctuary, but instead re-cracked open another fifth of Bushmills. Peace kings and peace queens. I will be back again the next time I'm in the Road from Orion in chapter 11. Please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment to help your big brother out, and I appreciate everything. Thank you.